Welcome to After Deadline, the media podcast. I'm Kathy Fowler.
And I'm Mark Silverstein.
We are veteran TV news reporters who turned to the dark side and now work as PR and marketing gurus.
Our guest this week has been to the dark side herself as a PR guru. She has an extensive background stretching from working in the music industry. And not only that, she sells merchandise and she's a roadie. It's on her LinkedIn. But she's also a columnist and a freelance writer, and she's also an author. We're excited to welcome the multifaceted Kim Kelly to the show.
Let's start at the beginning. You earned your degree from Drexel University, but it wasn't in journalism. You were in the music industry or music industry major with a world history and politics minor. So how did your career translate, from there to journalism?
Not only was she a music industry major, she's on her LinkedIn. It says marketeering and roadie for bands.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other. Well, it's kind of connected because I didn't actually finish college. I got pretty close, but I went to Drexel in West Philly. I was in their music industry program, which is very small and it kind of sticks out a little bit because it's mostly known as an engineering school. And then there's all these kind of like weirdos in the corner learning how to use Pro Tools and record bands and do record promotions. So I did that. But I got pretty close, got to my senior year, and that's when I saved all of the gross classes, like all the math classes. And I was like, I'll just get to it. It'll be fine. And turns out I'm real bad at math. And I failed a couple of them.
Because you're an artist, and artists aren't always I'm a journalist.
I'm a writer. I was really good at like my Russian language class, but I could not figure out like trigonometry or whatever. So not that long. Short story shorter, instead of going to summer school, I decided to go on tour with my friend's band instead, selling t-shirts and being a roadie. And then I just did that for years. And
all right, I gotta before we get into so the friend's band, where'd you go? All over the country? What was that? That's like a whole podcast in itself. I want to hear about it though.
Yeah, I spent my whole life in the heavy metal world, and I just, you get to know people because bands tour through and you get to know people, you make friends. And this one band, Dark Castle, we just on a whim, we're like, yeah, we need someone to sell t-shirts. You want to come along? I'm like, sure. And we did like a 6-week full US tour. It was definitely a baptism by fire because it was like a bunch of us stuck in this van, driving all over. Nobody had any money.
Just sing Tiny Dancer, like Almost Famous, or?
A little heavier than that.
Yeah.
Not quite. Those guys could not have kept up. But it was, I survived. And then I spent the next like 5 years touring with different bands. And that was kind of one of my jobs. And I even came out of retirement last year because right after I finished my book, some buddies were going on a quick like 2-week run. And I was like, I think I still got it. Let's see how this goes. And it turns out I still remember how to sell t-shirts.
So yeah, cool. So like, was there good income in selling? No, not for you. I mean, for the band, for selling t-shirts.
Well, merch is then as now it's one of the primary income streams. Like if you're in a small independent like underground band touring in a van, playing bars and small venues across the country, selling t-shirts and records is kind of the only real income stream you got because you never know if the promoter's going to pay you, if you're going to draw. So I had the most important job, I like to say.
Wait,
did you stand outside or did you like
you never
actively
been to a show
get
before?
In there and
have you been to a concert where the merch booth is?
Yeah.
That's where she was.
That's where yeah.
Not outside like selling bootleg merch of the Eagles game.
Well, there's that.
They probably make more money.
Well, the funny thing is now, like, if you go to vintage stores, like, I wish I would have kept some of the old t-shirts that I had. Like, I had this crazy Van Halen t-shirt that I know, like, would be selling for so much these days. I mean, there's shirts that I just probably gave to Goodwill. And now I look because I love some of the old bands, Bon Jovi or whatever, the 80s bands when I was a kid and went to. And I'm like, some of those t-shirts are selling for $200, $250, $300, $500. And I'm like, yeah.
I have my insurance policy in there in my drawers just in
Oh, there you
case. Just in case that somebody gets famous someday. I'm like, okay, I've got the old t-shirts tucked away.
yeah, hang on to those old t-shirts because that's going to be worth some serious money.
And so, and what was the roadie part? Was there more to be? I mean, beyond the
Yeah.
merchandising?
Yeah, well, I mean, all the gear has to get in there somehow. So yeah, you carry amplifiers and guitars and gear, and you help put things together and break them down and make sure everyone's where they're supposed to be, and maybe act like mom sometimes.
Oh
And
yeah.
it was it's I mean, Almost Famous is, I guess, the most widespread cultural touch point. And it's not like quite like that. It's not like the 70s, but yeah, it's just kind of a just I don't know,
I
controlled
like the way you said
chaos.
you came out of retirement. Is there a retirement
Roadie.
plan for roadies, merchandisers?
Oh,
Is
I
it?
know people who have been out here for decades, but I just since I was doing that, but I was also writing and I was doing PR and I was booking shows. I was doing all these different things. I always wanted to just be a writer, and when I finally got the opportunity to like have a real sit down media job in New York, I was like, oh, okay, like maybe I should get some health insurance and like get a steady paycheck and maybe not be paid in cash all the time and actually do some more writing. So that my retirement plan was, I guess, my the rest of my career.
So how did you get from that to the journalism then?
Well, I've always been a writer. Like I started writing for like local publications in the local newspaper when I was 15, and just wrote for it throughout high school. I'd write for like little zines, and we call them web zines back then. Ugh, early 2000s. And in college, I got some internships. I got an internship at a heavy metal magazine in New York called Metal Maniacs. I learned a lot there. I worked with the college radio station, so I met a whole bunch of music industry people that way. And I was always just writing for anybody who would have me, and kind of worked my way up from small, like little tiny underground publications to, by the time I was in college, I was writing for things like Brooklyn Vegan. Like I think I started writing for like an AOL website, and started writing for NPR. Like just kind of worked my way up through the little music journalism ranks, like in the very specific specialized heavy metal world, which is it's a huge global genre, but there's not that many people at that time in the US that were writing about it, or were writing about it well. And I'm pretty good at writing about heavy metal and a couple other things. So it worked out pretty well. And then I just kept hustling. And by the time I think it was like 27, a friend who worked at Vice at Noisy, their music vertical, they had an opening. It was like, oh, you want to just come work here? Come try it out? Yeah, okay. And that worked out pretty well for a little
So
while.
it's a lot of making connections and keeping in touch with those
Yeah,
connections
it's
and
all
then
about
doing the
who you
work. I
know.
mean, you really worked hard.
Oh yeah, I would be like in a tour van at 3 a.m. driving overnight somewhere after a full day of chaos and being on tour, and then just writing up my record reviews for Pitchfork, or writing up artist interviews for Decibel. Like I don't know how I did it really. I didn't sleep very much for like 5 years straight, but it worked out. And yeah, and I still write about music, but not as much as I write about labor and workers' rights stuff now. There was a big pivot that happened while I was working at Vice.
Yeah, how did that happen? So at Vice, you were working for Vice, and did they just want you to start covering those topics, or?
Oh no, I hated it. So I was the heavy metal editor there. That was my title. That's what I did. Yeah, I wrote about some other stuff sometimes too, like sort of like country music. So I got to interview Dolly Parton and things like that too,
Oh,
which
cool.
I'll always flex about. But yeah, my job was heavy metal editor at the music website they had. But right after I got formally hired full time, so I was contract for like 8 months before that, which sucked. But I finally got hired full time, and a couple weeks after, some coworkers pulled me aside and said, "Hey, we're thinking about unionizing. What do you think about that?" And I was like, "Oh, thank God." Because I grew up in a union family. I always knew that unions were a great thing that were really helpful for people, but didn't think I'd have an opportunity to take part myself. So it's like I sell t-shirts and I write about heavy metal on the internet. There's not like a Metalheads Local 666 for me. But it turned out there
Would it
was
be 666? Would that be the?
Mark of the Beast, yeah. At least the kind of metal that I'm involved in. But yeah, while that was all happening, I was I got super involved. I was in every meeting, every committee, got to know the organizers, got to know the labor lawyers. I had a long-standing interest in like in politics and kind of in labor in a more just like, oh, that's a cool thing sort of way. But when I finally got my hands dirty and got involved in organizing myself, it's like, oh, this is the coolest thing in the world. This is what I want to write about. But my job was still heavy metal editor. So I was doing a lot of freelancing. And really the thing that kind of tipped it over is when I started pitching some articles to Teen Vogue. And this was earlier on before they became known as this big, like revolutionary publication. That was kind of unique to see somebody writing about labor unions for Teen Vogue. And
Right? Like it doesn't seem like
it
they're
was
writing up
at
some
least in,
like,
in 2017, 2018, it was not not
that
David
was very
Gore.
revolutionary. That's cool.
Yeah. And then once I started building up some clips writing about labor and kind of establishing myself as someone that kind of knew what she was talking about in that world, I just sort of kept going, kept pulling in clips, kept meeting people and making new contacts. And by the time I got laid off in 2019, I thought, you know what? I want to try doing this. I've done heavy metal for 20 years. I want to try to be a labor reporter and see how it works. And then about a year later, I signed the contract for my book. So I guess it worked.
That's awesome. So tell us, you mentioned your book, recently published Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor. Oh, yay. Oh, wait, hold it up for longer. There you go. You can hold that up for longer. That's great. Wow. So tell us about, because writing, did you always want to write a book? I mean, was that on the checklist or did that just an opportunity came and it was the right topic, the right time, and it was happenstance?
I mean, I've always, even since I was little, I always assumed I would just be a writer before I knew anything about what went into that or what that looked like as a job or a job. Especially as I got into journalism, I always assumed I would write books because that's what you do when you're a grown up who writes, right? You write books. That's what I had in my head, at least, because of course not everybody wants to or is able to do that. But yeah, I connected with my agent back when I was still at Vice. He reached out to me. He was a Jersey guy who was into heavy metal. I was like, oh, great. And I initially wanted to write a book, like a heavy metal book, because that's what made sense at that time. And then that idea kind of shifted into like a different direction, like a book of personal essays about like where I grew up, because I grew up in kind of a weird place. And then that shifted more as I was covering labor and getting more of a reputation for that. And I decided, okay, I want to write a labor book. And we put together a proposal and we sent it out, and some publishers were like, I mean, obviously a couple of them at least were interested. And it all came together really, it took a really long time to get to that point. But then once we had the proposal and once we'd reached out to editors, it went really fast. And all of a sudden I had my biggest homework assignment ever. I had to write a whole big ass book in a year.
Wow. People don't realize, I mean, unless Mark has written a book, I have a sister who's written a book, and I know that I could never write a book because I've watched other people write a book, and I'm like, it's hard to write a book. I mean, like, it's not even coming up with the book itself, it's all the other things you have to do with the book. Like, it's just like, it's big.
That's the thing, like like writing that I can do, like researching that I can do, interviewing, talking to people that I can do. It was all sort of like the fiddlier things, like dealing with legal and the fact checker and the edits, and then dealing like putting together promo, like all of the stuff that happened after I put the words in the Google Doc and sent it to someone. That was kind of the most stressful.
Yeah.
And like putting it all together, because I'm pretty I'm very prolific generally when I'm not promoting a book. And so I'm used to writing a whole lot and meeting deadlines, and kind of the book itself is just sort of, it's very similar to the work I've been doing already. And so it was just kind of an opportunity to stretch my legs and really go deeper on some of the things that I'd had to otherwise restrict to like a 1,500 word web article. So it was a lot of fun, even though I was tearing my hair out by the end. And my my husband came down one night at like 3 a.m. and he looked at me, and I just looked at him. I said, what if I just delete the whole thing? And he convinced me not to. But,
Thank God.
but at that moment, I was just like, yeah. So yeah, it's difficult, but it can be fun. But it is definitely
Well, there's
big
two parts
commitment.
to it. There's two parts. There's the writing, and then what the publisher really cares about is the selling.
Yeah, that part, which
You got to have a long list of contacts, and where are you going to go? Where are you going to pitch this to, and where are you going to be written about, and how's your social media following, and all that kind of, you know, and
How are
can
you
you
going
get
to
into
promote
Barnes?
it?
Can you get into Barnes and Noble? And
Yeah,
Where in Barnes and Noble can you be on the shelf when you first walk in the door?
right. Like I feel like that was my thoughts like that was the publisher's job. You guys do the distribution, you do all that stuff. I'm gonna work on my connections and talk to people and hit up all my media friends and hit up people I know in different cities who where there are cool bookstores. And I did. I mean, you know, the team obviously worked really hard, but I definitely did a lot. I
Yeah,
did.
right.
you have to
I
do a
took
lot.
I took a
So
very DIY approach to this thing.
tell us about the book. Tell us more importantly about American labor. Like, what have you learned when you look at unions and the history of unions and where we are now and the breaking of unions and all that went into breaking unions? We had a TV union that I was a part of, and you know, there's companies that moved to different states just to hope, you know, to break unions in different towns or to weaken them. So
SAG
it's tell
after?
us a little. You what?
SAG after or WGA? Do you remember?
SAG-AFTRA, but there was a company in particular that literally in the DC market, one company went and moved to Northern Virginia just to weaken the labor because the DC
That was
because it
always the
was.
speculation. They never copped to that, but it was always.
Oh, yeah, okay. They never copped to it, but in the meetings, you know, yes. No, they wouldn't cop to it publicly, of course not. But anyway, one of the stations
Kim
moved,
has a new story. She's going to get
and they
all
knew
over.
it would break that because if one station got to lower the rates, it just brought the whole market down. So the whole market went down in salaries because of this one station. But anyway, you know, that it's like people, I don't think people appreciate, you know, what unions gave to this country.
Yeah,
And the benefits that you had today was because of unions. Anyway.
yeah, people fought and died for these things. I mean, I'm lucky that I grew up in a union family because not that many people are able to say that anymore because union density is so low because, you know, unions have been kind of cut off at the knees by there's a lot of reasons, but the more is more fun to talk about about my book, I guess, than getting into the life and death of the US labor movement. But so the book, the idea, it's well, it's called Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor. And going into it, it's I guess I describe it to people like the elevator pitch. It's kind of like, you know, Howard Zinn's A People's History of the US, but focusing specifically on the US labor movement and specifically on women and Black and Brown and Asian Indigenous workers and queer and trans workers, disabled workers, sex workers, incarcerated workers, all of the people who have been here the whole time, who have fought and died for the rights we have now and for the protections and benefits we have now, but haven't necessarily gotten their due, have been relegated to footnotes or left out entirely because of who they are, what someone else thought about their opinions or their identities. Basically, I wanted to pull up a whole bunch of different stories of people and movements and campaigns that happened and had an incredibly important impact, but maybe don't know about as much as, you know, the Detroit auto workers. A lot of people know about that, or about, gosh, what do people even know about US labor, right? Like I didn't learn anything in school about it. Yeah, basically I just wanted to show like all of us, we've all always been here and look at what we've done. And here's some of the people that I think are important, some of the moments that are important. And I had a lot of fun putting it all together and putting it together in a way that it's definitely not an academic work, 'cause I'm obviously not an academic, but I tried to pull it together in a way that was compelling and kind of fun and pulled people in and make sure that it was really accessible. Like it's structured in a way that it's kind of like shorter, like every chapter is a couple of short pieces about different people or moments or events. And my thought is that I kind of want people to be able to pick it up and read it on their lunch break or on the bus or after they get home after a long day's work. Maybe they don't want to read a 300-page book all the way through, but maybe there's a part in one of the chapters that speaks to them that can give them a little bit of a pick me up before they get on with the rest of their day.
And what do you
Yeah.
want them to do as a result or learn? Like, or what did you want to change when reading this book? Like, what did you want it to inspire change, inspire people? What was
Oh,
the,
absolutely. It's the idea is to show people like, look, like you, no matter what your identity, no matter what your background, someone just like you has been out here doing this work already. So there's no reason for you not to try. There's this weird, I guess, like, I want to say fancy media because it's not all of us, right? But there's this fancy media and politician impulse to paint the US working class as one specific type of person. That when they say that, they mean white guys like my dad who wear hard hats and have pretty bad political opinions and live in rural areas. And yeah, those guys are part of it, but the rest of us are there too. Like the American working class is incredibly diverse. Honestly, the most common type of person to be a union member in this country is a Black woman, and she probably works in healthcare or hospitality, not on a factory line or in a meatpacking plant. So I wanted to put this out there and kind of challenge some of this common, well, I don't want to call it wisdom, these common perceptions of who unions are for, who unions have been for, what they've done, who's been part of the whole thing. Because I think a lot of people just don't know this history. And so they maybe feel like it isn't relevant to them, or it's closed off to them, or they wouldn't be welcome at a union hall or a protest. And I wanted to show that that is absolutely not the case. And I'm hoping that people are able to pick this up, especially younger people now who are getting interested in the movement through hearing about Amazon or Starbucks and going through and reading about, Stonewall, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, the 1983 copper strike, or the mine wars, all of these just incredibly potent moments in our history that you're not necessarily going to hear about in school. You're not necessarily going to see in the front page of the newspaper or sitting on the shelf of Barnes and Noble. But I wanted to make something that was easy for people to pick up and look at and think, oh, wow. So this is, so
I
I'm
think,
allowed here too.
yeah, what I noticed about your writing is your great ability to focus in on an angle that hasn't been magnified yet. And I was reading your piece for Teen Vogue about workers out in the heat. And I was like, wow, that is I never would have thought of that. But you found this angle, and you just wrote a great piece about it. And it sounds like that's what you did in your book. But tell us about the Teen Vogue article about the.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that one was really, honestly, that one was really personal because my partner, he works on an urban farm here in North Philadelphia. So he was out there, and you know how hot it was this summer. And he was just out there every day. He would come home just drenched in sweat, exhausted, feeling sick. He would, no matter how much water he drank, it didn't seem to matter. And this is the person I love the most coming in feeling like this. I'm like, oh God. And I just thought, okay, we're in Philly. Like it's hot, but it's not Nevada hot or Texas hot or California hot. So just thinking about the folks who are outside all day, who can't hide in the air conditioner, go, pop into Starbucks for a minute for a break. People like farm workers and construction workers, and also people like I interviewed a couple of folks who work at airports who are
Yeah, that's where
outside.
it got me. I was like,
Yeah,
oh wow. I don't think the baggage handlers or the
my
people
friend
who are out on the
Davida.
tarmac and the.
Because there's just so much. I think there's so many different types of work, and there's so many things that go into keeping our society going, and it's so hard to just exist that people don't always necessarily take the time or have the presence of mind to think about whose work is powering all these things, whose work is making all this happen. Like think about oh, it's really hot on my subway car. What about the maintenance people going out into the tunnels to look check and see what's going on in the tracks? Like, and we're all connected in so many different ways. And I have this platform and I want to use it to kind of bring some of that invisibilized or forgotten or overlooked labor into the spotlight, because we we really don't know how good we got it. Because if, as we saw earlier in the pandemic, the idea of essential work, all work is essential unless you're like a CEO or something, but some
Hey.
types of work but some types of work we we just can't exist without, and those are typically the jobs that get the least respect and get the least money and the least care. So
And when you think about climate change and you think about people who have to be, I know that OSHA was doing some work, and we work with an International Safety Equipment Association, and now people think of PPE as like people learned PPE because of COVID, and they learned the mask and the gloves and all that kind of stuff. But cooling, I mean, people who work out in the heat need PPE that is specifically to help cool down their body, because like you said, there's not enough water on the planet that can help you. I mean, you will still, it's like unhealthy sometimes for people to be outside. And just think, if you have a pre-existing condition that already makes you like more susceptible to heat, and then you have to work out in the heat, I mean, it can be very dangerous to your health. It can be deadly, you know, and people have died on the, you know, working because it's too hot.
Right. Like one of the people I interviewed for that piece was an 18-year-old boy who works with his mother in the fields in California. And one of the things I asked him, like, what do you need? What do you guys need to help get through the day? And the biggest thing he wanted was, we just need longer breaks and some real shade. We just need some shade. Like, he's not even asking for air conditioning or sports drinks or anything. And thinking about PPE, there's just so many different types of hazards that people face on the job, whether it's heat, whether it's cold, whether, you know, I've been following this coal miner strike in Alabama for the past 2 years. And whether you're, you know, these are folks who are 2,000 feet underground in underground coal mine filled with methane gas, who are breathing in silica, and who are dealing with black lung. Black lung is this occupational lung disease that has been around for centuries, but it was, well, not for centuries, for far too long. And people don't think that it's still out there. People don't think it's impacting people. It's actually at a 25-year high, and it's impacting younger and younger people because of geological conditions and all sorts of other things. But there are just so many different ways that workers need to be able to protect themselves that they're so often not given. And since people don't necessarily see it, they're not out there demanding for a change. So the workers have to do it themselves.
Do you think there's enough, you know, I mean, I don't know if I'm a compassionate person, but sometimes I'll see these workers out there and I'll go, well, that's the job they chose. I mean, is there enough compassion, or are you trying to bring compassion? Are you trying to bring understanding to what the workers are up against?
Oh, yeah.
And I was just using me as a fake example.
I was going to say.
I want to get off this interview now.
Start throwing some elbows.
I saw your eyes light up, and not in a good
I didn't realize
not in a good way.
Talking to an inhumane person.
Well, the American worker is look what's going on at Twitter. Where look what's going. Amazon's laying off. I mean, we may be at all-time record high employment, but they're just shedding whoever they can in emails. I mean,
the lack of compassion, that's definitely something I hope to foster in this book. I don't know how many people that run companies and act like that are going to read a book like this, but at the very least, I want people to read it and realize just how important and precious they are, and how powerful they are, especially when they work together. Because like you said, there is such a lack of compassion, because people, I think the way that our society is structured is just so cruel, and we're not encouraged to look after each other or to support one another. We're encouraged to just, you know, bootstrap our way off and get yours and do what you can to take care of your family, your people, your bottom line. But none of us can do any of this on our own. And even if you're the kind of person who's like, oh, well, that fast food worker, like, that's what they picked. That's all, like, whatever, that's on them. How many opportunities do you think they had? How many, like, and I mean, sure, some people like that job, and that is perfectly fine. But a lot of folks are taking what they can get with what the opportunities that they are given, able to access, because we know this country is not fair and it's not set up equally for everybody. So if you're the type of person that looks down on someone for the job they chose, I asked earlier if I could use profanity, but you can just use your imagination on that one.
Yeah, no.
We're going to cut that question out. No, we're not.
No, the other question is that, so in the last, since we've had a labor shortage, this is the first time I feel in a long time that labor has had a little bit of leverage. And COVID, it brought a ton of bad things, but people were able to say, no, I'm not coming back. And people were like, why aren't they coming back? They're lazy. Well, they're not coming back because you're not paying them well. You're treating them like crap. And they decided that they have a second to breathe and like to rest, because they're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs. And the wage gap, it has never been greater. And we can't, this is not sustainable, rich people, billionaires. If you think this is sustainable, there's going to be an uprising, and it'll be like, you know, the Roman Empire falling, you know what I mean? And this is happening globally, right? Like everywhere, the wage gap is unsustainable between the haves and the haves not. Do you think, but there for a nanosecond, I thought that labor did have a little bit of leverage. Like they could say, no, right now we got a little bit of, leverage because you need me more than I need you. So I'm going to demand like at least minimum wage, and not the crappy $7 minimum wage, at least the $15 minimum wage that's in certain states. How long do you think that leverage will hold? I mean, because it could shift very quickly. And what do we need to do to close that gap? It's insane. It's not sustainable.
I mean, I think we're at a point where you can't put a genie back in a bottle, right? There's been such a increase in I kind of like mass consciousness, class consciousness of people realizing, like you said early in the pandemic, I have a second to breathe and to think because the government actually did something useful for once. It gave people some money. I left my terrible job. What do I want to do with my one short life? And a lot of people they decided I want to organize with other people and force some of these changes at my workplace, in my county, in this country. And we've seen this wave of new organizing happening across the country and across a whole bunch of different industries. And a lot of it's being led by younger people and people in industries that aren't traditionally thought of as union industries, like retail or in the academic world or even in tech. And I don't think that's something that's going to go away, especially as this rampant, vicious, crushing inequality continues to expand. We continue to see these wretched billionaires just kind of rubbing it in our faces. And we continue to build tools to communicate with each other and to share our stories and to get information out there. Because even if the New York Times or Washington Post isn't going to show up and ask somebody on an assembly line what's going on, they can get on TikTok and tell everybody for themselves. And that might hit a million eyeballs, or it might just make that person feel a little bit stronger and a little bit more empowered and able to talk to their coworkers about something that's been bothering them. We're in this point where we could have it doesn't have to be like this. We could have so much more. We really could. It's just, I mean, not to veer too far into a different type of soapbox, but I think our political leaders have so little will to actually change things because they're so concerned about their corporate donors and about the New York Times yelling at them and about people being rude to them in the subway or whatever. They don't really care that much about working people. They care about us when it's time to vote. Shout out to this blue-ish wave or whatever's going on. Unite Here, Hospitality Workers Union, which is based up predominantly of Black and brown immigrant workers who do low wage work but have a very strong union, basically like save democracy.
In
And
Nevada, you're talking about in
yeah,
Las Vegas.
Nevada,
Yeah.
they're in Nevada, they're here in PA. They ran this massive ground operation just because they wanted to make sure that things wouldn't get quite as bad as they could be. But our politicians going to reward them by, enshrining union rights in every state constitution in a federal way? Are they going to raise the minimum wage to at least $20 at this point? That remains to be seen.
See, the problem though is what happens is they bring the Democrats in and they save democracy, right? But then what people don't look at is the Republicans will block everything. And it's just because there's still not enough Democrats, because as both political parties have not done enough for the American workers, but the Democrats by far at least want to do, but have not enough power because there's too much on the other side. They can just block things. Like they're never going to get the federal.
The Republicans are just insane at this point.
Yeah, but there's not. But then what will happen is the Democrats will get, well, you didn't do it. Well, we tried to do it. We still didn't have enough on the other side. Like
maybe this time.
Maybe we'll this time, hopefully, it will help.
I think everyone just kind of knows that Republicans are useless when it comes to caring about working people or poor people or human people. They get to pretend. Well, that's true. They get to pretend. They're very good at pretending to care about the American worker
and the military.
Yeah,
and the religious people, but they don't really care about any of them, right? I mean, to be honest, they don't act like it anyway.
The amount of military veterans who are facing suicide and homelessness right now would look a little bit different if Republicans who were in power actually cared. But it's all about photo ops.
Yeah.
Like going down to a coal mine, putting on a hard hat, and then ignoring the strike that's been happening in Alabama, a red state, for 20 months.
So do you think, though, and my thoughts were, I think politicians have always wanted to keep people overworked, underpaid, undereducated, because that's benefiting them, because you're so busy And then you only listen. The only way, if you do have time to vote, you're only voting on the 30-second ads where you're hearing the pretty stuff and you don't have time to do the research. So an overworked, overexhausted, underpaid worker, keeping them so busy where they can't afford to take off to vote, or if they can, they certainly don't. They're less educated about voting because they don't have the time to actually do it because they're so exhausted. I think that plays into the whole system. That helps, keep the wage gap exactly where it is today.
I mean, that's capitalism in a nutshell, right? Keep people miserable and starving and uneducated so they don't know that they have the option to collectively organize and try and force change or vote for something better or get rid of some of the worst that are somehow allowed to tell us how to live our lives. It's all, I think it's all engineered. It's been like that since it's always been like that, right? We're living through this new Gilded Age, and there's no daylight at all between the likes of Jay Gould and Jeff Bezos. The politicians back then who campaigned to keep certain workers out of major labor laws due to racism and misogyny. They're still keeping people out. They're still doing their best to make sure that some classes of workers, some classes of people feel like they're less than, and making other people think that they're better than, so that that division continues to grow and keep people from coming together. It's all, everything old is new again. And
on a positive note,
let's talk about.
You guys are depressing the hell out of me. Hold on a second. Wait.
No, okay, but wait. But she's writing. Part of the only way to change it is to write about it, uncover it. And you're doing this stuff. It's very interesting that you talk about this in Teen Vogue. So this is not how did that topic, explain? Because that, when I think of Teen Vogue, I mean, not to be, I don't even know.
You're painting with a broad brush. It's
when I read those teeny bopper magazines, it was, what's the best lipstick and how to get a guy, and I don't even know.
It's not a teeny bopper magazine anymore.
I know, but I'm just saying.
The idea, it's been so interesting seeing that specific publications. It's changed so much, but then the actual content that it creates and also the way it's perceived by the public, right? I started writing for them in 2017, and I first started writing just a couple pieces about just various prison industrial complex stuff. And then I pitched them one day. I was thinking about, I was like, okay, Teen Vogue, the audience is predominantly younger women, younger people. It would be cool to write something about Mother Jones, this labor icon who's this badass. Maybe they don't know about her. I'll pitch a profile. And I pitched my editor there on it, and she wrote back saying, that sounds really cool, but I don't think our readers will know what a union is. So why don't you write about that first? I was like, oh yeah, okay. And I wrote an explainer of what a union is, and it ran in Teen Vogue. And it got a bunch of attention because people were like, what is this doing here? That's been the reaction. That was at that time, like you said, it wasn't what it is now. And that was also at a point, I think, during kind of the life of the media, where a whole lot of people were paying more attention to politics, and especially to social justice issues, because things were already getting so bad under the Trump regime. So there's this opportunity, I think, for people to start really pitching stories like these and getting them out there. And I was really lucky to work, because I'm still a freelancer, but I was really lucky to work with a couple different editors at Teen Vogue who got it, who understood where I was coming from, who just kind of let me do what I wanted to do and didn't really get in the way. So I was able to write a lot of pieces that I think they hold up. And it was pretty cool to write about, exploited garment workers in a fashion publication, right? I think that's probably, I still can't believe they let me get away with that one.
That's awesome. But you're right. I mean, think about garment workers in particular, rough conditions, low pay. They used to get paid by the piece, I think, which is ridiculous.
That still happens now in garment work and garment factories in Los Angeles. It's all, everything. That's one reason that labor history appeals to me so much, even as a kind of younger person. Everything that's happening right now has a precedent, or is happening because of something that happened earlier, or is building on work that someone did 5, 10, 15, 200 years ago. And it's just so satisfying to see those threads, and to also be able to learn from some of the lessons and mistakes and victories that people that came before us were able to pull off. There are so many lessons from the past that are so relevant right now. And it's been really cool to be able to dig through them and share them with people because I mean, I'm a big nerd, but I think it's the coolest thing in the world.
What was the big art? There was a big article that everybody went, "Why is Teen Vogue?" It was like the big turning point article that they did, and they got a lot of pub for because it was like, it's not your mother's Teen Vogue.
My Teen Vogue.
I think there have been a couple, and like people on Fox News get mad at Teen Vogue all the time and do segments on them.
Must
They
be
did a
doing something
segment.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Consider that a compliment.
yeah, I think I've been on there a couple times for things I've written.
The so things you've written. So what was the first or the most recent story that had the biggest impact or a surprise impact to you, or just made a difference that you went, damn, I did
You're
this.
proud of, or
So I've been kind of consumed with the book for the past couple of years now, but there is, like I mentioned it briefly earlier, I've been covering this coal miner strike for in Brookwood, Alabama. Over 1,000 coal miners have been on strike since April 1st, 2020. This is in Deep Red, Alabama. It's a diverse workforce. They've been in those mines for, some of them have been in those mines for generations. They've been on strike for so long against this Wall Street backed uh, coal boss company that came in and is trying to squeeze them and starve them out. And I've written about that for a bunch of different places. I think the one that got the most attention earlier on was I wrote about it for The Nation. So I've written about it for The Nation a couple times, but that was the first anybody had really heard about it because local media is firmly on the company's side, has been running kind of anti-strike stories. And the major media hasn't shown up because it's in Alabama. It's not in New York or Chicago or LA. And the people involved, the strikers, a lot of them are conservative, religious, like Trump voting people. And that is an extra layer of nuance to this kind of story that I think makes it a little bit more complicated for people to come in and cover. And they also work in coal, which is a fossil fuel, which we're in the middle of a climate crisis, another very complicated topic. So there's all these kind of forces working against them. And I've just decided like this is my personal crusade. Like I am going to keep showing up and keep writing about it. And just seeing the way.
So do you go down there? I mean,
oh yeah, I was just there last week.
Oh.
Yeah, I've been
so
back
it's boots on the
probably.
ground kind of thing. It's not that we're covering through.
Oh no, I've been down there it's like 8 or 9 times.
Oh.
I'll probably be back again. But just hearing from the people themselves about how much it matters to them that someone who's not from around there, who isn't from coal country, who maybe looks and thinks a little bit different than they do in broad strokes, is still coming down and getting their stories out there and paying attention because so many people in this country, especially those who work, those who are poor, those who are in rural places, nobody pays attention to them. They feel like they've been forgotten, they've been left behind, and no one gives a damn whether they live or die. So doing the work that I do, I wish I could be everywhere. And I'm only one person, but even being able to make just a few hundred people in Brookwood, Alabama feel like they haven't been forgotten and people do care and that by God, they are gonna win. Like that is the biggest privilege I can imagine. And I'm just gonna keep doing as much as I can.
A lot of those people who were forgotten, they ended up going for Trump because he spoke to them, although he didn't, and none of his policies actually benefited them. But what is it going to take? Like, what do you think? One, like I feel like they're so fed up with all the politicians. They just think they're all rotten apples. You know what I mean? And maybe. And I don't think they're all rotten apples, but they all get painted with a bad brush and then people just disengage. And that's the worst thing that you can ever do, because if you disengage, well, then forget it. You're never going to make change. But I think then also, like, what's it going to take, do you think, for change to eventually happen? Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel after being in this for so long?
Yeah, and I think they're all rotten too. So they think they're onto something there. But if I was like a Democratic operative and I was like, what are we gonna do about Alabama? I would send all of my biggest guns down there right now and send a whole bunch of media crews and politicians and people that are good at talking to people and send them down there and get a ton of attention on this strike and show like, oh wow, okay, people are paying attention to us. They're donating to our strike fund. They're doing all this. and they're Democrat, but I was told that they were like evil baby eating lunatics. Like, interesting. Like, I think so much of this is just showing up and listening to people and meeting them where they are. And obviously, some things are never allowable and you can never let slide. But you can have a conversation with somebody and find that common ground. I think labor is a really fertile place for that to happen because no matter who you are, almost everybody has either had a job or is going to have a job or has a job right now. And there's probably something about it they don't like. And complaining about your job is a great way to build some solidarity with somebody because there's probably things that you have in common. There's probably things that you can find that you can agree on. Like, that's something I've learned from being down there with these folks. Like, I see the world a lot differently from a lot of the folks there that I talk to and that I call my friends now. But there's a mutual respect. We're able to talk about some of the more complicated things in a way that I think we both are able to see where each other's coming from and be like, okay, all right, stalemate, but okay. You know, something that I've seen that actually gives me a lot of hope and does actually, I think if I was a political operative, I'd be paying attention, is that these folks in Brookwood, Alabama, not a single Republican, anybody has showed up for them. Their senator, Tommy Tuberville, actively has worked against them in the Senate and held the company's line.
Does he know he's acting against them, or he's not really well aware of much of what he's doing?
He read a statement from the company in front of a hearing in Congress, in front of a bunch of the coal miners, then tried to shake their hand. What a herb. But just to say that, right. So they've been abandoned by the people that are supposed to be on their side. The people who have shown up have been people like the DSA, like the local Democratic Socialist chapter, other labor groups. A ton of Black union members from the Gulf have come out on buses and showed up and showed support. Union members and just supporters from across the country have donated to their strike fund and their auxiliary. The people who have shown up are not the people that they have been told are on their side. And after a while, that's going to get through. Like, I have friends on that strike who have gone from saying, I'm a conservative Republican, to being like full-blown socialists. And, maybe you don't even have to push it to that extent. Maybe you just need to try and get them a little bluer. But really just showing up and listening to people and not writing them off because of where they live or how they talk or what you think they believe. It sounds almost hokey, but I think that's the secret, and not showing up in a suit and being a big dork, because Democrats love doing that. Just be cool and be normal and talk to people, and you'd be amazed.
Wear your jeans and a sweatshirt.
Yeah,
whatever
get a bunch of tattoos. They love me,
You can do a sleeve, maybe. No, they won't respect fake tattoos.
So, in addition to the book, what else is what's the next goal?
So I'm working on right now. It's not like super announced, but whatever. I'm working on a young readers edition of this book, A Fight Like Hell, for ages 10 and up, which will be really fun. I'm going to start working on that this month. And I'm also working on this investigative project for In These Times about, like I mentioned earlier, the rise of Black lung among younger coal miners in Appalachia. And I'm working on that for a couple months. And I think that's due pretty soon. But those are my two big things. Then after that, the paperback of Fight Like Hell comes out in spring and summer of 2023. And I'll spruce it up a little bit for that. I'll probably do some more bookstore stuff around that. Then I guess eventually I'm gonna have to write something new.
Wow.
So tell us about that. You said the younger version for 10-year-olds. Are you just trying to educate people younger so they are aware and they can think about organizing and changing their lives, so you don't go around thinking it is the way it is and you have to accept, whatever's in front of you?
Yeah, I think there's a really cool tradition, and especially modern upswing and more, not even more radical, but just a little bit like radical kids literature, because kids are people too, and they're smart and they deserve to read real books about real history and real people. I'm going to take a handful of people from my book, whether it's, Baird Rustin or Dorothy Lee Bolden or Ben Fletcher, and just do kind of little profiles. Here's this person, here's what they believed in, here's what they did. And isn't that neat? And put it out there.
I love that.
Yeah,
love that.
And there are a lot of union parents and a lot of teachers who are in unions who would probably love to have something they can give their kids to explain why mom or dad is going to a meeting every night,
Yeah, that's cool. I love that.
Should be fun.
I think that's great. You know what? You're going to change things by educating the younger generation who's truly going to change things.
Yeah, that's the thing, like now that I'm not like I was always the youngest person in the room when I was doing something. And now that I'm in labor, like I'm still kind of in that position, which is funny because I'm 34. But there are kids 10 years younger than me that are already causing such an immense amount of good trouble. I'm just like, imagine what the 14-year-olds are gonna do.
Oh, wow. So
All right.
how do people get the book? How do people follow you on social so they can follow all the great work that you're doing and they can learn about labor and politics?
Sure. Yeah, the book Fight Like Hell is out on One Signal, just part of Simon Schuster, so it's kind of all over the place. I always tell people if you're able to get it from like an independent bookstore or bookshop.org, but it's also in Barnes and Noble, it's in Amazon if you have to, and also just get it from the library. I think that's awesome too. And I'm in terms of finding me, for now at least, I'm on Twitter.
At the moment, this week, maybe
Yeah,
today, at least we don't even know if it's the week.
as long as any of us are on it, right?
Yeah.
So for now, and I'm on Instagram, Kim Kelly Writer, and I am trying to figure out TikTok. We'll see about that, but yeah, for now, I'm pretty easy to find.
Hey, if you do that book for the 10-year-olds, you're gonna have to get on TikTok,
It's on the agenda. I have some younger friends, so I'm like, okay, please just tell me your secrets.
Have them do it. You tape the things and then just have them turn it
I'll
into
just show
TikTok.
up like here, yeah. We'll see, but yeah, pretty easy to find if you want to find me. Just give a little whistle.
Keep up the great work. Get the word out. We're
we need to
talk to.
We need to clone you and have like hundreds of you.
Yeah, I don't know how you're able to do all that stuff. Yeah,
not enough people are doing this. I'm just so frustrated by like what's happening, and I'm like the middle class worker. Just things are looking worse and worse for them. And it doesn't feel like. But I'm glad you've given me hope, so I'm glad. I feel more hopeful.
Thank you.
Kathy had mentioned that I had a book, so when the book came out, when it first came out, I would go to stores and make sure it was moving around and make sure the cover was up, and then I went to Costco and I was like, why aren't we in Costco? And then we got to Costco and I was like, oh, is this not good? Is this the end of the road for the? Is it over now because they're just trying to get rid of it in Costco?
No, I think, honey, it was over when you were being sold for 25 cents at Goodwill or something.
Yeah, Amazon. Yeah.
But hey, you were still unpacking the person. Goodwill is hip now.
We have many stuck in our house. So if you need one, Anyway, great talking with you. The book is Fight Like Hell, the Untold History of American Labor. Kim Kelly, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Thank you.
Well, that was cool. I love that topic. Not that you could tell.
Yeah, that was nice of me to, ask one or two questions, get elbow in there. No, fascinating. Great. And I really do mean that. She just comes up with great angles on things and makes it interesting. When you hear about labor, you're like, maybe I do want to, maybe I don't. But when you just look at the spotlight she puts on the different angles, good job. I mean, it makes it very interesting.
Yes. Go out and get her book, because especially if you work with a really big company, Walmart.
We all work, so we all should know about
We all work, but
especially
if you work with a big company, like some of these big companies that get out of not paying you and giving you what you deserve, read it. Organize. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this week's episode. After Deadline, the media podcast is a production of On the Mark Media. If you enjoyed this and want to hear more of our interviews with incredible journalists across the country, around the world too, be sure to follow us on social media at On the Mark Media. And subscribe to After Deadline, the media podcast, anywhere you get your favorite podcast.
Until next time. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I thought I had a line or something, so I'll just let you finish up.
No, you do the
No, that's all right. Why should I? No.
Until next time, we'll catch up with you
after Deadline.
Okay, beat me to it.